There we go. We are recording. Hello, good morning. On the West Coast, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today is June 2nd of 2021. This is the SIG API Machinery bi-weekly meeting for Kubernetes. And we have, again, luckily and happily, a packed agenda. So we are going to get started right away. We did a little bit of shuffling on the topics because I know that people that participate on the first one have to leave around 11:30. So let's start with that.
Yeah, maybe I can introduce the first three. I grouped them all together because they're kind of variations on the theme of platform providers setting up and maintaining clusters. Yeah, so I actually think the second one on this list is getting at the heart of the problem, which is that there's no in our Auth system there's no space for a platform administrator that has superpowers that a cluster administrator doesn't. We kind of do that by putting files on disk, but that only goes so far. So I think, yeah, that's my current feeling on it. So maybe you'll all agree after this. The first part of this is the one I put first because Javad has to go at 11:30 is this idea of sometimes the platform administrator wants to police things with webhooks, but you can't police webhooks with webhooks. So yeah, Javad, do you want to talk more about this?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, and thanks for the opportunity. So this work is a little bit of background on this. We want to do policy enforcements and want to have restricted access to namespace and resources, namespace level and cluster level resources. And then we do have a notion of privileged identities, users who can actually bypass these resources. So for end users, they cannot, escape this policy that we have via mission webhooks. But what they do is like they can create mutating webhooks, and then these mutating webhooks basically captures the requests from privileged users, which are kind of like admitted by this policy enforcement. And then once they are kind of like captured by these end users mutating webhooks, they can mutate it to arbitrary values and then target the restricted resources that we have. So one thing that what we're trying to do to kind of like solve that problem, we're trying to say, hey, we should also kind of make sure that the mutating webhooks that the users are adding are not interfering with our policies. And then in order to do that, we need to be able to webhook webhooks, which is not currently possible. My guess is it's not possible because we wanted to avoid cycles and also wanted to make sure we're not getting locked out of webhooks in case there's a bad configuration. But then we're kind of like saying, okay, what if we, when the cluster is coming up, we kind of like specify a few webhooks that could intercept other webhooks. And also we specify what we call maintainers, which are exempt from these webhooks. In other words, these maintainers requests are not captured by these webhooks, so there's not gonna be possibility of like being locked out of these webhooks. That's the gist of it. They can talk more if needed.
So looking at this design, I want to make sure I've understood what the API is trying to tell me. Assuming there's not a KEP that goes with this, explaining it in more detail.
No, we didn't make a KEP. We weren't sure if it was going to be big enough for that or not.
Okay, I guess I'm trying to at least understand what this is telling me. So I think what this is telling me is that there is a webhook that is being created in the example, and it says, I wish to allow another webhook to intercept me. Is that what that webhook intercepting webhooks with identifiers field is trying to tell me?
So
there's two layers of exception. The first is you're listing special webhooks which are permitted to view changes to other webhooks, or actually, I think they're permitted to view changes to any webhook. Right? They can intercept changes even to webhooks. Then there's a second layer of exception, which is there are special identities which may make changes to webhooks which don't go through those special webhooks. And the reason for this is the goal. The goal, as always, is we don't necessarily care if you break the cluster. We care if you break the cluster in a way that you can't recover from without messing with etcd. So the goal is like there's identities in the system which, if your special webhook somehow breaks the cluster, the special identity has the ability to go in and remove the special webhook.
And I noticed this special identity listed here is not a system master. It's something else. Why is that?
That gets into the second problem, right? Like the whole point is actually we want to lock out the cluster administrator.
Okay, so I'm wrapping my head around this here. You're talking about creating a webhook configuration that allows punching through some users to allow them to always modify something, but you would not always allow the system master, the identity that's actually hard-coded in our product, as able to do everything. You would not allow that person. Right,
that's correct. The goal here is to add a more powerful identity than the hard-coded one.
I see.
I mean, we have this concept today, right? There's files on disk that people in the system masters can't necessarily mess with.
Is there another example where this exists inside of our inside of an API server resource, right? I mean, like I do agree that a file on disk that specifies something like the kubelet config, is untouchable, but in the REST API, is this novel?
Well, I didn't see the current version of this. I thought that we were adjusting a config file on disk, actually.
Yeah, but then I kind of like convert that config file to mutating the webhook's admission configuration. There's a config file which is consumed with admission layer. I just merge that with that config file.
Yeah. So
okay.
So yeah, this lets special identities manage special webhooks by the normal API. That is novel, I believe, but I think it is okay.
Well, I was going to say, I agree it's novel, but this is similar to things we do with like the API server network proxy. I mean, those, like you said earlier, are done on disk, Daniel, but we do have this, especially in the managed Kubernetes world, we have this concept of a group of users who have access to the direct access to the control plane on this persistent control plane on disk, and can make configuration changes that cannot normally be made by other users.
Yeah, I agree. The novel thing here is that we're extending people with these powers. We're extending them the ability to manipulate API objects, right? It's like no longer are you confined to messing with the cluster by doing stuff with files on disks. Now you can set up those files such that you can mess with the cluster at runtime in special ways too. I mean, and like, you're not going to be manually doing this, right? You're going to write a controller or a webhook or something that does it for you.
Wow. I mean, I don't know that I would presuppose to know what users would do once they have such an ability.
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing it right, the number of users of this are going to be fairly limited, right? It's going to be big platforms probably.
Well, I mean, kind of to David's point, though, Daniel, I think we've got to look at it through both lenses. In a managed setting, I would agree with what you're saying, but I also think we should think about what happens in how this gets used in a non-managed setting.
Yeah, I guess in a non-managed setting, you could just say that all of your webhooks are special, and then forget to put in any identities that get accepted, and then get your cluster totally broken. You could totally do that.
Yeah. There's also, so there is, say someone is the system master. What stops them from simply choosing to impersonate Alice or Bob and modifying these webhooks anyway?
That's a great question, and I believe the next topic on the agenda is the Authz webhook, the second Authz webhook, which runs first.
Yep, and this should sort of, if we have this provision, this should sort of answer that question. I'm not sure if we can begin on the topic right now.
Yeah, let's stay on the webhooks for a little bit. I actually had them in the other order, but Javad has to go, so I wanted to do it in this order.
Yeah, I do have reservations about adding this kind of capability. Whether those reservations are enough to say like, no, we shouldn't do this, I'm not sure. I guess I do see it as large enough and significant enough a change that it seems appropriate, right? We're changing the rules about, I mean, I was fairly certain we initially, when we wrote it, said webhooks cannot intercept other webhooks, flat stop. And we said that, and the reason why is because these, you can end up in cases where you would loop, right? There's also a consideration, like if you say, I think that this is targeted at large enterprises, I mean, those people could produce, you could produce a separate, you could put a patch in to say like, hey, I want Kubernetes plus my special admin admission webhooks. Maybe they configured differently, configured on disk. Then the idea of a not all-powerful system master. It's interesting.
So the one thing I will point out, David, we've had multiple rounds of the various like cloud providers, for lack of a better one. Managed services come and chat with both API Machinery and SIG Cloud Provider, specifically looking for ways to have protected webhooks. And I think there is a pretty common feeling for like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, that carrying patches is really expensive. And I'm not saying it has to be this particular, but there seems to be a fair desire amongst the managed services to have something like this, where they can have a protected class, an easily added protected class of rules or policies that they can add.
I would like to explore whether this is the best implementation of that, understand what other options were considered, right? Do you just need validating? Does it have to be mutating? I have a comment here on a PR, so I don't know what that intent is. There is some behavior of like, what does this API do? Is it an intersection? Does someone have to be both Alice and Bob at the same time and both of these groups? Does it have to be Alice with both groups? Is it any combination of these groups, regardless of whether you're Bob? The API isn't clear here.
Yeah, those are implementation we can work that out in the implementation.
Well,
I think the basic thing that I think the SIG needs to decide is it okay to begin adding the concept into the API of users who are more powerful than the system masters group?
that is an interesting concept, and I'd be interested in knowing what the boundaries of that capability are, whether they actually belong as part of the surface area of the current API server we have, or whether we want to create a different set of APIs for them to manage, right? You recall that SIG Auth had a desire to configure authentication webhooks via the API. It would seem to be a similar concept.
I don't see it as that similar.
Well, they
we're not adding. This isn't like a dynamic group, right? We're not adding arbitrary numbers of more powerful groups, right? We only need one more layer.
But if you had a more powerful group, what would that group manage? Do they only manage these admission webhooks, or is there something else they manage?
I think we will find additional things for this group to manage. Basically, I see an additional group as a superset of what the cluster administrator can do.
And I'd like to know where we see the boundaries of that before saying yes, we should create this concept. Okay. What else are they going to manage? Because like I'm looking at, I know for SIG Auth will come in and say, I think this person should be able to manage authentication webhooks.
I don't know that that's a. I'm not planning on. In terms of like making this function and be feature complete, I believe that the only changes to API server that are needed are the webhooks and adding the second Authz webhook. I think if you've got that, then platforms can build whatever they need without patches. So no, that wouldn't include a dynamically adding auth in webhooks, right? The platforms can already do that if they're willing to mess with files on disk. It would include things like the platform admin wants to ensure that a certain set of CRDs are available and that users can't change them, right? Because you can already do that with our API. So I'm not interested in adding capabilities that aren't already in our API, right? We're in this weird position right now where if you can monkey with files on disk, you can do random powerful things, but you can't have the same level of power over the things that are in the API. So that's the, I think that's the primary, right? I think that's the bit that is preventing cluster administrators from or platform administrators from really governing their clusters in the way that they want.
But is the issue there that the concept of being able to configure it exists in the API, right? Like I remember you arguing strongly against having I guess either you or Jordan, I don't remember which it was, arguing against having authentication webhooks present in the API for similar kinds of reasons. Do you see this as essentially that? Like for instance, if you had the ability to simply configure a hard-coded admission webhook that cannot be changed in this admission configuration file, would that satisfy? And if you had that, would it in fact be able to manage all the things that you want here?
So my issue with like I don't know what you mean by hard coding. Do you mean like a configuration file?
So this configuration, I've finally figured out what this configuration file is. This is the one that allows you to pass configuration to individual admission plugins. And And it does allow you to do some cool things you can't do any other way.
For this, like, we already have this webhook callout mechanism. There's various issues with it, but I don't think they get, I think everything gets harder if you like put webhook configurations on disk.
Well, a webhook or not, like, could you make it so that you called a binary, right, and said, make my decision?
So that gets into like I think there's actually a better class of extension mechanisms that use a different technology rather than calling out to a webhook. I'm talking about building something out of WASM or CEL or something like that, right? That would actually be a significant improvement. Like if you could like specify at various points in the code base, like call out to this opaque binary plugin, that would be pretty cool. I don't think we're going to get to something like that in the near future, but I think the two changes on the agenda right now, these webhooks and the second Authz webhook, those could go in a release or two. They're not that complicated.
Not that complicated, but I think I'd still like to see the idea explored. And certainly, like, once you did this, both the explanation of the power that webhooks have, how to administer them, what they can do and why they can do it, all changes. I mean, like that all sounds like a KEP update to me. Like it explicitly says what it does, and this changes that, and it says that reasoning should be reevaluated. And I also want to know what else this user concept should be able to do. Will it have a consistent name? Is it addressable? Is a platform admin an addressable thing? Is it something I need to take into account when I'm writing other admission webhooks? Some admission webhooks here, they understand the idea of a system master. Maybe it's that I don't understand the boundary of what you're trying to describe as a new user.
So I'll just
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, the boundary of the user from what we want is like, we want to differentiate between kubeadmin and then Kubernetes platform provider users, which are kind of like trying to present the cluster in a certain way. And then the kubeadmin is different than that because kubeadmin is basically the end user. But then these privileged users that we're talking about are required to present the cluster in certain configurations that we want, which we look at as different.
And so, like, you can see how someone hearing that may wonder why the thing that you as the platform wish to maintain is accessible via the same API that users touch, right? Like, is it actually the case that you want configuration that is not exposed via the same API that users use?
Yeah, I've got two answers for that. One is it's just less work if we make everything work the same way, right? We only have to build one set of mechanisms. And I had and the other one is if we do build two mechanisms, we end up with the nice API for users who use it all the time and the not so nice API for platform administrators. And why would we do that to ourselves? Because I think many of us on this call are closer to platform administrators than normal users.
That's true. And I think we may have gone after solving this problem differently, right? Where you can go after this problem and actually put the things in your platform that you want to protect and maintain in a place that a user can't see them and can't touch them and can't modify them. And so all those properties means that you don't end up trying to stop users from touching certain pieces of special objects in their cluster?
There's a third reason, which is you can imagine an extension or a set of tools. Sometimes the cluster administrator is installing it for people on the cluster. Sometimes the platform, right? And we don't necessarily want to build two different mechanisms when a different actor wants to install the thing and maintain it, right?
I guess in that case, I'm looking at it saying, like, you're saying that you want to have a thing that is installed in a place where an end user who you don't want to modify the configuration can see it and touch it today. And instead of putting it in a place where they won't be able to do that, you want to keep it in that shared location and try to build a bunch of deny protections around it to protect it. Like, it feels like a lot of compensation around this protection, sort of like we have to get all the pieces right to stay protected, as opposed to structuring it in a way where someone else just can't possibly touch it. I'd like to see the distinction and the way those different notions come down as explored.
I mean, okay.
Like,
I don't know what the best way to do that is. We can compare with alternative attempts to solve the same set of problems.
Right. I mean, that doesn't, I mean, that seems like a fairly decent place, right? I mean,
the issue is we've rejected other between the lot of us, we've rejected the other possible ways to solve the problem.
I'm thinking back. I think you didn't like one of them, and I'm not like super stoked about this one.
Yeah. But I mean, the longer I've thought about it, and this has been a problem that's been on and off for at least a year, maybe 2 years, maybe longer than that, right? But the longer at first I was advocating for a solution where you could drop random manifests on disk and API server would ensure their presence in the cluster, and I thought that would go far enough. But the longer I've thought about it, and I think Vivek or Javad or both here have written up increasingly elaborate designs along that theme, and like it doesn't seem to really solve all the problems. I mean, it's the next thing on the agenda, so we can go on and zoom in on that. But
the next one on the agenda seemed more of a slam dunk to me.
The Authz, sorry, yeah, the Authz webhook. I guess we haven't actually talked about that.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's interesting. So you're not against giving people the ability to make a super user, because that's from our perspective, that's the point of the second Authz webhook that runs first.
So I look at this as an Authz webhook that runs first gives someone the ability to create a deny authorizer in front of RBAC rules.
Exactly.
And if you do not have that webhook in that location, you can never write an authorizer that will supersede RBAC. And so it's just a gap in power today, right? Like that.
Correct. But
yeah,
the reason we're interested in this, gap is that without it, for example, someone in System Masters can impersonate someone in the platform admin group, whatever that is.
Well, it also eliminates the ability to have something like a scoped token, right? Again, this falls into the category of like, I know because I put something in that spot. But if you want to have a deny rule, then this is just straight up missing power. So
yeah, and actually this solves most of the problem. Like if you have an ability to write deny rules, then you can make an arbitrarily powerful group out of that.
Well, I guess it sounds more like rather than you want to make an arbitrarily powerful group, you want to take one that's already arbitrarily powerful and hamstring it, which like this would allow you to do. I honestly don't know that I recommend it.
I think we have a difference. I absolutely don't think system master right now. It's totally confined by whatever people with access to files on disk do.
Well, I mean, your very first thing you spent 30 minutes presenting is system masters has too much power and I want to limit it. So like it doesn't, maybe you believe it's different power, but you clearly believe it's too much.
Yeah,
I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be having the first conversation.
It is a different interpretation of the set, right? Like it's not that I want to limit system masters, it's that I want to make something more powerful, which I mean,
it's
I
about
guess
giving more control to the platform provider, which at this point there isn't much a platform provider can do to enforce certain things, and it's about giving more power to the platform provider than taking away power from the kube admin.
I mean, David's right. It's definitionally like if you're adding power somewhere, like you must actually be taking power away from this other group. So I mean, you're right in that sense. But of course, I'm going to interpret it the other way around.
But you know, either way, like adding an authorization webhook that allows for a deny in front of the local rules sounds pretty reasonable to me.
Okay, what do you think our next step should be? Do we need to present this to SIG Auth?
I do, and I expect that they would ask you for a cap. A lot of that is like explaining for people who want to use this in their clusters what the boundaries are on it are, why you have it, why it exists, what you need to be careful of. Right, like if you suddenly start denying system masters, there's going to be a lot of code that doesn't expect that. I mean, I think that's a reasonable next step. Basically, all the same reasons I was asking for, like, help me figure out what in the webhooks, where you see the boundaries on that and where you're going with it and why the alternatives for those of us who haven't lived through all the alternative. I guess you must have reviewed PRs or designs or something. And I did not stay as current as you. I apologize for that.
Well, I mean, some of the debate happened internally, and like we've worked through the process of arriving here, but we haven't necessarily explained the whole journey out in the open.
I think it might help me to get there, and I'm open to getting there.
Okay. Okay.
I think that is a reasonable request here. And I think it was also, I talked to Mike on the Auth team, and he mentioned that a cap would be the next step, which seems fine to me. Yeah.
Okay. Vivek, can you take that on to start a cap and get something on the SIG Auth agenda and see where that goes? Yeah. And to be clear, I think the Authz webhook is more important. There are more possibilities for the webhook thing, right? We can imagine that actually gets into the entire problem of like there's ways you can break your cluster with adding webhooks. Which
there definitely are
debated. We've debated before, and I think we'll probably debate again. Maybe we should. We've used up over half our time. Maybe we should proceed on to the next agenda item. Nabarun, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, sure. So we have been trying to like revive the old discussions around the CRD installation problem, which happened like 2 years back between like SIG Auth API Machinery. So the primary goal of our exploration was to enable Kubernetes contributors and optionally administrators to specify certain CRDs to be installed at cluster startup time, which they can use as soon as the API server goes healthy. So our exploration was not from the point of view of like adding any arbitrary resource, but mostly around like CRDs. Also, this came into forefront because of one more thing, SIG multi-cluster, I guess. They proposed something like a cluster property and wanted some reviews from SIG Auth, and that's why like we also started again exploring that thing as to if any of our code owners want to introduce any CRDs, but they want to ensure that the CRD is installed as soon as the API server goes healthy, how do we do it? So we explored one of the methods, but we now feel that that method may not be really good because we are mixing the role of API server and an initializer in the same binary. So the logic still will remain same, just that we want to tie it up with a post-start hook. Now, there were some caveats or open questions that we thought. Number one was how do we ensure that those resources stay as they were installed during the runtime of the cluster. So what we felt was through your response and reading through the second Authz webhook discussion that can probably prevent it. Now, the other open question which remains is like who initializes it? Is it a controller in controller manager, or is it an add-on manager like binary, or is it add-on manager itself? So right now the add-on manager concept is more like, okay, we are installing like third-party stuff. So I don't know like how much that will gel with. And one more concern was like, how do we ensure HA? Because for example, like if I'm doing highly available upgrades, like rolling out the control plane, if I put one down and like let's say 1.x, I'm migrating from 1.x to 1.x plus 1, then if any resources changed in the next API server, how do we handle the conflict while storing it? So
yeah,
those are where
yeah, the upgrade question is maybe 50% of why it's not a good idea to be doing this in API server post start hooks, because API server has to run in split mode. It's much easier to do this in basically anywhere else. Like controller managers are leader elected. There's only one of them running. So like, at least, you know, if you're elected, then you know, like you're responsible for setting the current version of whatever these are. Yeah, I know you're interested in CRDs, but other people are interested in RBAC rules or admission webhook definitions, or like there's like everybody only cares about like one or two resources, but it's a different resource. So yeah, it can't. I think it can't be limited to CRDs.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
We can come to a conclusion on like what kind of resources we want to install through this and make it like a standard, because I think like we can't allow like installation of workloads like pods, because if we give an option to the user to install something, it may be something malicious. That's what my thought was.
So
yeah, I don't know about pods, but I think absolutely you should be able to install a deployment this way. Like how are you, like suppose you want to run a webhook and you want to guarantee that it's there when the cluster is open for business.
So I guess I would like to, I remember this thread. I remember commenting that the idea of such and such is present before the cluster is available wasn't clear to me in concept how that would work in the case of cluster upgrades where the thing wasn't present when the cluster was available before. And during an HA upgrade, it may be present, it may not be present. And there's no sense of like, it's always been available. So what does it mean, always available for you?
Yeah. I mean, I can answer for me, but do you have an answer?
So we were also like stuck on that question. So there are cases like 1.x not having that resource, but 1.x plus on introducing a new one, 1.x having a resource, 1.x plus on updating it or removing it. So we still don't have like answers to that question, and we one of the intents of that email was to like try to assess answers to that question, like thoughts from the community, so that we can reach to an acceptable solution to everyone.
Yeah, I have two answers. The first one is like cluster startup is a different case than cluster upgrade, and it's okay if there's some different meanings there. The other is, if there's some component that is responsible for updating these things, we can define when in the upgrade process that component's supposed to be upgraded, right? Like right now, if you're not upgrading everything at once, then there is an order in which you have to do things, right? You have to do webhooks first, then API server, then controllers, then kubelets, right? There is an order right now, so we can decide, does this upgradable thing get upgraded before you do the API server or after the API server? We could decide that. So I guess it's an open question to me whether we want to do this in open source or not. Because if we have this second Authz webhook, one of the purposes of that is to hold non-privileged traffic to the cluster until this initializer, whatever it is, initializes things. I think that's a much easier sell than making a new initializer type thing. I don't really fully understand why it's so hard to do that. Like we have this addon-manager. I don't think every installation runs it. And it doesn't work super well anyway. So like we could fix it. Here's our options. We could fix the addon-manager to give it a special identity that is, optionally at your discretion, protected by the Authz webhook. We could add a new controller and controller manager. We could add a new controller in a new binary. I think both doing the addon-manager and a new binary place constraints on cluster providers, like people who are starting clusters. It's like, oh, there's this new binary you have to run. Good luck figuring out how to do that. So people aren't super thrilled with that. So controller manager is probably the path of least resistance, I guess. I think we already do something like it in controller manager. Don't the service accounts for all the other controllers get created by a controller that runs a controller manager?
Hard-coded list. You aren't allowed to configure it. What I was going to say is that I see a benefit for. So I would not like to see a case where the Kube API server readiness is informed by the presence or absence of some particular set of resources. And I see difficulties there because, a lot of times you'll want a resource that actually needs something else to take an action, and that complicates it quite a bit. So that means in my mind that before the cluster is available isn't a concept that I think has generic meaning across all Kube clusters. I think this is just after a cluster's running, I can install this.
That's actually a great point. I was not envisioning this as affecting the health Z endpoint or the ready Z endpoint. I was envisioning the Authz webhook itself having a latch, right? So it starts up and it blocks traffic that's not system masters or not platform admin, if you have that concept. Then this installer runs, and then it directly tells the Authz webhook, hey, the cluster's good now. The Authz webhook flips a switch, and now it starts permitting ordinary traffic.
So I'd be happy for someone to build that outside once the capability is there. But in terms of benefit to the actual open source project itself, I do see some value in having a way for us to have the Kube controller manager create and maintain an opinion on a CRD. And I see that benefit because I think that is what stalled a couple different storage efforts. Was they wanted to create their resources as CRDs and not as core resources, whether that was good, bad, or otherwise. That was their goal.
Runtime class, I think.
Yeah,
CSI
and I will say,
files.
I'd still come down on the side of like, if you're built in, you're built in. But if people want to explore that idea, that seems like some value to bring to the cluster. Having done this a couple times in OpenShift, OpenShift has controllers that manage custom resource definitions. Such a controller can be a challenge if you do not control the rollout of the controller. So you can imagine if you have version X of your version X that installs CRD, subschema A, and then you have version X+1 that installs subschema version B. If you are not careful about your rollout to ensure that your leader elected instance always applies, never applies the subschema B level until it's fully past the point where any prior instance can grab the lease, you can end up in a case where you go from schema A to schema B to schema A to schema B. Interesting things happen to clusters that do that.
Yeah, you can't run this in split version mode, unlike API server. Bad things happen.
Yeah. Novel in terms of things that currently exist inside the Kube controller manager, which if we want to be sensitive to how people manage upgrades, I don't think it causes a problem for me, but like if you want to be sensitive to how people handle their upgrades, that's going to be something to carefully consider and write down.
So there's at least one way to get around that, which is just to latch at the newest version. So if you happen to go backwards and you see a more recent version of the CRD there, or whatever object it is that this thing is managing, just don't change it. That may work for certain object types, but in general is pretty limiting because
recent
it is
not a universal concept.
Right. It is if we maintain and encode a like generation on the set of objects, right? Like we can say every release we're gonna increment this number, but in general it's very limiting because people do occasionally want to roll back the cluster version, and in theory at least we support that by one revision. So it's a little weird if you roll back and then your CRD doesn't go back with you.
Yeah, it's a problem.
So I think another thought is if we're going to do this in controller manager or something like that, there may be some types that aren't suitable for this, like a webhook configuration, because we in there's many ways of installing a cluster, and we in open source don't necessarily know how controller manager is reachable from API server if we're going to run like a webhook inside it or something like that. And we also may not want to force people to run the binary in the cluster, right? Like a platform provider can do that if they want to, but we in open source can't add an invariant to like all clusters like that. I don't think that would be very popular at all.
It's true. I don't think you need that to get a whole lot of mileage out of it. Like I do see CRDs as the single item that would give you the most mileage internal to the Kube project itself, right?
Yeah.
Things like I want to install a deployment, that's a whole lot more opinionated about deployment topology. But if storage came to us again and said, hey, we're our runtime class, we're trying to do runtime class again, we really want a CRD to do it.
Yeah, part of an issue is
end
that
up stuck on the evolution because you need to have a conversion webhook. I see.
Right, I was about to say part of the issue is that CRDs often involve some sort of webhook, whether it's for validation or conversion or who knows what, right? But CRDs often have baggage.
Fine.
So one of the things, so we did take that into cognizance that whenever we install a CRD, it's not just the CRD. They have like associated webhooks and controllers, and we kind of assume that whoever is expecting that CRD to be there, they will have their own kind of processes to have them, which also is kind of a bit finicky. As in like expecting an external entity to external as in any other open source code owner to like run a process like that. So yeah, I did have one question. I think you have covered it a bit. Like when we do have a second webhook, Authz webhook, like who runs that webhook? Like, we can configure that, but who runs that? Who writes that webhook? Is it will it be in tree? Will it be delegated to whoever is building on top of Kubernetes?
Yeah, it's a webhook, so whatever somebody wants to write and however they want to host.
Yeah,
So,
I think that at least at first the plan was this is just left up to the platform administrator, or the cluster administrator if it happens to be the same person. It's unclear to me if we would want a if we wanted a here's a thing that we could do that I don't think we're going to want to, but you can imagine that we decide like we're going to not only add a spot for a new Authz evaluation to happen, we're also going to add a concept that describes how you can build a deny rule, right? That would be an entirely larger undertaking. and so I think we're not suggesting that. We're just giving a way for this to happen if the platform administrator wants it to happen. And I think the future could evolve in two ways, right? Like there could be a platform or several platforms that are like, hey, we came up with this way of describing deny rules and we think it's great and we want to open source it so that all clusters can work together, blah, blah, blah. Like that could happen. Or maybe it wouldn't happen and platforms are like, this deny rule is just for us and we don't need to extend it and give it to users. It's not clear to me which would work out. Does that sound right to you, David?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple different ways where people try to describe deny rules today. The one that I like best is the one that I like best that I've seen so far is one where like there is some aspect of a token review that says the information on your token says you should be restricted this way. And we built a way to pass that from the authenticator to the authorizer. And the authorizer uses the information from that token to do the deny. So the data is always present, but there are many ways to do it.
Yeah, so that wouldn't be role-based deny.
No, I tried to write role-based deny when we made RBAC, and I could not get it right. So
it's surprisingly complicated. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm pretty sure we can't do the last one in 5 minutes, so we're gonna have to let that fall over again. Can we do the storage version migrator in 5 minutes?
I just have one final question on it.
Oh, yeah.
So what is the way forward for this? Because it still would come up as a repetitive ask by other SIGs to do CRDs or to write it as code types. So how do we go about it? Do we explore a new controller in controller manager? Because I am hearing that it probably would be acceptable, but then how do we webhook? How do we weave it with the webhook? That would be the open question still, and the upgrade downgrade scenario.
So I was initially going to say like, hey, we can build something to do the CRDs inside the Kube controller manager and everyone like that. But the issue of evolving an API, likely requiring a conversion webhook, has convinced me that won't work well. I think it might actually be valuable to write up a rejected KEP, which sounds crazy to ask someone to do, but there is a state for a KEP that says rejected, where we could actually say, like we thought about X and it didn't work out very well. Like we thought about putting it in the Kube API server, but that doesn't work very well because it doesn't handle HA upgrades well. And then we thought about putting it inside the kube controller manager, and it faced HA upgrade problems. We were able to solve them by doing this latching concept that may or may not be good. But even if we get them in the kube controller manager, it won't work well because we won't be able to have the webhooks handle the API evolution. So in the end, we thought about it, came up with several different ideas, none of which worked super well. And the person who comes up with the next idea, please let us know. I think that's where we ended up. I don't know if you, Daniel.
I think we want to be that next person to come up with that idea.
So definitely in whatever write-up of like these things should go in rejected alternatives, right? whatever we write up. I don't know that we completely ruled out controller manager doing this. I think like I can imagine offering like imagine we offer two setups out of the box, and you can select from via flag which one you want, right? Like we can offer a setup where we run the required webhook into cluster as a pod, as a deployment as a pod. And like if your control plane is really hard to set up, then you can do that. Alternatively, we can, if your control plane is such that API server can talk directly to controller manager, like you could pass something else in the flag, and then we run the webhook directly in controller manager. That has major issues over upgrades. If API server, like if you program in a different webhook configuration, and that is seen by an API server which only has access to an old control, like that gets complicated again. But it seems possible, and it also further it seems like adding a new control plane component doesn't help this problem. Right? You still have this problem whether you're running it in controller manager or you're running it in a new thing. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that we've rejected that alternative yet.
That's fine. Maybe I haven't heard. I haven't seen in my head how that would work well in all the distributions, but
yeah, I think there's
either way is writing it down.
Even just what I said has many cases, right? And I'm sure that I didn't cover all the bases yet. So I think I kept discussing some sort of controller and controller manager that adds at least CRDs and maybe a few other resources at cluster startup. I think that might be the next step. I can't think of a thing that would be more useful than that.
I mean, we can do that. I feel like that's the same ask. So we should just assume that right now the protection mechanism does not exist, but it will exist in future, right? Should that be an assumption?
Yeah, actually, I kind of. Yeah, I feel like we should skip, just punt on the protection mechanism at first, right? At first, like, if you're a client and you need this thing, like, just keep retrying until it shows up, and call it a day. That's much more robust than like, shutting down the cluster until the thing shows up anyway. So I think we should just skip the protection mechanism to begin with, and if platform administrators want to implement something, like, great, go for it.
Awesome. Thanks for the notes.
Oh, we're out of time. I think if you want a small meeting working group type, working group is a preserved word. If you want a small meeting to discuss in more detail, that might be pretty reasonable too, and maybe set something up on the SIG list or something.
Sure, I'll reach out on Slack.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, I guess we'll have to punt the other questions to next time.
Yeah, yeah, we will carry over for next time. And we are out of time, so I want to thank everybody for coming and participating, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Stay safe. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.